I think we're ready.
We're ready.
You're ready?
Yes, ready.
Sorry to constrain you
It's
and
all right,
constrict you in this
tight.
space.
Yeah.
If you want to jump up and move around at any point,
okay.
just do it.
Through some moves.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to start at the beginning, boringly.
Yep.
What was it about John Travolta that got you into this whole thing?
I think it was just his passion for dancing, right? He just kind of came alive on that dance floor, and you see this kind of like this physical kind of vitality, and I think it's just amazing when you see somebody kind of live out their passion, and I think that just really hooked me.
So that was as a kid, Grease,
Saturday Night Fever, yeah. And so I started ballroom dancing lessons, disco lessons then in the 70s, and just went on from there.
Because this is in Stockport, not necessarily known as the kind of home of,
like
contemporary dance
and ballet, no. It was in Stockport, but again, you know, I had a lot of really kind of encouraging teachers, a lot of champions at school. I mean, I didn't do lots of arts education in formal school, but all arts activities out of school, so amateur dramatics, choirs, brass bands, you know, I was kind of into everything. I was a very physical, very lively child, gymnastics, you know, javelin, you know, so always having to do something.
Always moving.
Always moving.
Except right now.
Except right now,
Where
we
you're
get
sitting
strained.
Yeah. And did you know back then, I want to dance, I want to be a choreographer? Was that even in your kind of vocabulary?
I don't think you do. I didn't even know what a choreographer was. I didn't even know that was going to be a vocation or a potential job. I think it's great now that young people know that they have those options, that creativity and working in the creative arts sector is something that they can actually aspire to do and have a phenomenal life out of doing. But I think in those days, no, my parents were quite keen on me having quite an academic kind of education. So making sure that I did history, economics, you know, general studies, English literature at A level. I didn't do really any art subjects. But the balance of those two things, I think, is stood me in really good stead.
I mean, you're a bit of a super brain, aren't you? You're just sort of bringing in technology and working with all these different kinds of people.
I don't think it's that. I think I just love ideas. I'm super curious. I think I'm really open to the world in which we live now. And I think you can't be a contemporary artist now without being in touch and plugged into the real world. You know, you don't want to be an artist working in a bubble and just kind of be self-referential and just talking to yourself. I really want to make sure that I'm reaching out, and I'm just interested in things. I love reading, and I become a fan of something and get really engaged in it and think, well, why not try and explore something in relationship to that with dance?
Because that's what I was wondering, when you start off with a new idea, where does that begin? It begins in your brain, it begins with something you see, it begins, how does the collaborative process start?
I mean, I think it's partly I've got a long list of ideas that I'm already working on, so I'm kind of, you know, working on something all of the time. And that piece might not emerge for another 3 years, but the kind of idea has already started to percolate. I mean, I think what's amazing about dance is that it's so connected to everybody because everybody has a body. Everybody knows what it is to have an interior life and an exterior life. Everybody knows what it is to move. Everybody knows what it is to have kind of a physicality embed itself inside you. And so when you're talking to a cognitive neuroscientist or an artist, they also have a shared medium, the body. We all have the same kind of boundary object, if you like. And so even though we're expressing ourselves differently, we've got something really in common straight away. And that makes it very easy to start a conversation. And then I just like to spend time. I think it's really important about collaboration that you spend time with the people that you're working with and just let the kind of the ideas emerge rather than having a set idea and then trying to kind of colour in the picture.
So you work with neuroscientists.
Yeah.
Or, you know, what do you do? You work with the Wellcome Trust. You know, what goes on there?
Well, I think it's partly just a fascination with what's happening cognitively when you're moving. You know, in the olden days, we had this kind of like this idea that the brain and the body were totally disconnected. You know, this kind of sense that we're all just walking heads, walking brains. But actually we know this because of embodied technology and the ways in which we're using technology now, that actually the whole thing is connected. And I was just interested to find out more about that. What does it mean to physically think about something? What is physical thinking? And we do it all the time. If I'm about to reach and touch your shoulder, already I've got a sense of how far I have to reach before I touch you, what kind of velocity I would need. All those things are happening intuitively in my brain before I do it. And that's a version of physical thinking. And what we're doing as dancers, is doing a more expert version of that, working with physical thinking, with complex coordination or really extraordinary things that the body can do. So almost like exploring the body as a technologically literate thing. You know, the body's a phenomenal thing. And I'm just super interested in exploring and examining and working with that.
Do you think anyone can dance?
Everyone can dance. Everyone does dance all the time.
Really?
Yeah. Do you dance?
I do.
You
Yeah,
do?
I like dancing.
Okay, everyone does this. Some people like to dance when no one's looking, and that's
Yeah.
fine, right? But I think what's interesting is that everybody has a personal physical signature. So when I came in the room and met you today, I already had a sense of something about you, the way in which you greeted me, the way in which you had eye contact, the way in which your body orientation was in relation to me, how far or how distant you started to communicate, actually how was that transaction of energy. And in a way, choreography or dance making is about that. It's about a transaction of energy, and you get a sense of people like that all the time. If you're walking down the street, you know those people that you would quite happily walk just straight past, but quite close to, and those that you'll slightly circumvent, and those that you'll kind of give a wide berth to. There's just something primal about our ideas of physicality that just rests inside us. And beyond that, we all want to express ourselves through our bodies. We do that all the time. And so sometimes it's just encouraging people to have the creative tools to make their own dances that excites me.
And so when you're working with dancers,
Yeah.
do you, when I was looking at quite a lot of your rehearsals, you're making these noises, chum, chi, chan, chi, chan. What are those sounds?
What are they?
Yeah, what is tian, chan, che, bang, or whatever?
I think it's this energy thing that we talked about. It's this transaction of energy. It's trying to use sound to shape action. So if I said to you now, if I went, okay, wah, what does that feel? There we go, you do it, right? You do it, you instinctively do it. You already have a kind of a kinesthetic response from that. So that sonification, that sense of sound shapes a dynamic. Elite sports coaches use that kind of sonification to get better performance out of people. And so it's just a different way, a more direct way of accessing something in the body that the body already knows. And that's one of the ways in which I love to work in the studio.
Do you have it already set in your mind?
No,
Not at all?
Not at all, no. I mean, I think I do all the prep work and usually all the design's done. The music is usually mostly constructed. But when I go into the studio, I like to be really open and really free. Because I really feel that when you're making a piece with phenomenal dancers, like the dancers that we have here at the Opera House, that you are making with those dancers, they're co-authoring the work. So when we did that little experiment and I went, wow, and you did that in your own special way.
Yeah,
that
so
nobody
special.
else could do it like that. And my job in a way is to recognise what that special signature is, what that feel is, and then use it to develop something which says something about our idea and says something about you. So that collaborative process is one that is shared. It's not one where I stand at the front and tell you what to do, because for me that's not interesting.
And when, I mean, Wolfworks, for example, which obviously was a huge hit when it first started, I was thinking about, a lot of what you're talking about to do with the body and the movement, and it's also about, cognitive thinking and all of that. Virginia Woolf, are you thinking about her sort of mental anguish, her depression? Does that tie into what you're doing as a choreographer?
It does tie in. I mean, I think, one of the great things about Woolf is that she absolutely loved dance and loved music. And what she wanted to try and do with her kind of experimentations in writing was write more like a dance or write more like music. And so kind of extract all of the conventions of writing of the past and find a different, more immediate way of getting into the experience of self, if you like. And so that was already analogous with dance, quite easy. And then, you've got this amazing, vivid visual poetry. You've got this kind of feeling, not so much plot so much actually, but just feeling and experiences that you can really use in a really interesting way. And, one of the great things about dance is that it works with ambiguity extraordinarily well. It does multiple meanings at the same time. It allows you to kind of swim inside a world or a universe in really extraordinary ways. And I think that's really very, very connected to the way in which Woolf writes and wanted her readers to swim inside these beautiful worlds that she creates.
I mean, clearly people respond to people doing things in very different ways. But do you sort of understand or accept that things that you might think really natural, other people might think quite esoteric?
Yeah, of course, and that's fine. I think, for me, again, the transaction of energy is when we put the performance on the stage and we're trying to communicate something or with an audience. And to do that, the audience also has to be very open to what it's receiving. So it's super easy in an audience to sit there and think that you know exactly what you're going to get before you go there and search for evidence, clues that reinforce your opinion. And so what you do is sit there. So I know everything about Wayne McGregor's work and I'm going to search for those things. And I think when you do that, you miss all of the things in between, those kind of interspaces, which Woolf does so phenomenally well, where actually you're having to work a little bit about constructing meaning. And I think, dance obviously can be entertaining, that's wonderful, but it also can be provocative and it can be challenging and it can be exciting, it can be stimulating in lots of different ways. But you as an audience member have to kind of offer yourself to that. You have to be open to it, and you have to look. Yeah, you have to really see. And I think that is one of the phenomenal things when you can get a piece of work and an audience really working together to construct the meaning. The meaning isn't always only on my side. The meaning actually also has to come from your side, and that's where the richness comes.
And you, I mean, obviously you've got your own dance company, but you also are a resident choreographer here.
Yeah.
Do you see what you do here as ballet? Do you call it ballet? Is it ballet?
It's ballet. I mean, it's ballet here because you're working with these phenomenal dancers who have a very particular technique. So their history, their physical archive, if you like, has been put through a training system that primes the body in a particular way. We're working in ballet because it's at the Royal Opera House, and the conventions of that stage are such that there's an archive and a history of the pieces and performances that have been on there. And I guess what I like to do is try and dialogue with those things and try and push the envelope about what that might be. I don't think that ballet is a heritage art form at all. I think heritage is very important, but ballet is a 21st century art form. It's something which should be evolving and changing, and our audiences should be doing the same.
Do you think it's still an elitist art form?
I don't think it is. I mean, I think one of the great things about dance is that immediacy, and I think more and more people are coming into the theatre to watch dance. You know, the ways in which we're doing things like live cinema relays, the internet, virtual reality dance, you know, there's so many ways in which young people are touching and having access to dance. And I don't think it matters where you start. Yeah, no, exactly. Chemical Brothers, or, you know, Lotus Flower, or, you know, I've just worked on, you know, Fantastic Beasts. We work in lots of really interesting ways through the body. It doesn't matter how you start, as long as it kind of invigorates your appetite for dance. So I started with John Travolta. I didn't start with, you know, classical ballet. And I think you see that now with lots of young people that I come across. You know, they're starting because they see some urban street dance, they see it actually might be Strictly, whatever it is, it fires them up and wants them to explore more. And that's all we want, right? We want people to be just curious and open and excited to be creative. And that might come through the medium of dance, or it might come through the medium of visual arts or music. It doesn't matter, as long as actually what you're doing is making sure that people understand and value the real richness in creativity.
I was wondering, you know, about what the best thing about being in a position that you're in, which is obviously there must be a lot of great things. One thing I suppose is just, do you, you know, like the Chemical Brothers or Tommy York or whoever, do you just think, oh, I quite like them, I might see if I can work with them? Or how does that, or do they come to you? How does it work?
Both. I mean, they ask you, you ask them, you know. I mean, I think it's again, it's very direct. There's no mysterious process. It's all about people, and it's about saying, I love some of the things that you do. I'd really love to work with you on something to see how we might be able to invent something together. One of the great things about working here, of course, is that you have the resources and you've got the support to be able to do it. You know, it's not just the incredible dancers and the management team here. You've got amazing production facilities where things are still being handmade, where things are being made by an elite team of kind of artisans, and that kind of quality of support is really phenomenal because it allows you to be brave, it allows you to take risks. And you know, I often hear people say, well, the Opera House isn't, it must be difficult or challenging to work at the Opera House, but it isn't, because it's full of hundreds of super creative, super open people who are all in the business of doing the same thing, trying to allow artists to realise their ideas in the best way possible for audiences, and I think that's phenomenal.
I mean, I was hearing about your first job, Redbridge Council.
Yes, it was, yeah, when I first came to London.
And what did you have to do?
Well, in those days I was this thing called, it was in the early 90s, and I was called a dance animateur, and basically you animated communities through dance. So you would go into a local community and you might be teaching early bilingual learners, or you'd be teaching, or you might be working on a tea dance, or you might be, you know, you just never know what kind of community group you would work with. And again, that's all about people, and it's about people finding their own creativity through their bodies. And I think that's just what I've been doing kind of all my career, really. I
mean, I was thinking about it and just thinking, do you think a council these days would fund that?
Well, what's amazing is Redbridge still do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so
amazing.
Actually they do. And actually what's
the
really...
next Wayne McGregor.
Well, you know, in a way, it's also talent spotting and finding people who might be going into these art forms in the future, but it's also making it available, the creative process available to everybody, because everybody in whatever aspect of life that you're living, being creative, stimulating innovation is really, really important. And I guess things like dance and music, and in whatever form, and the practice of that is allowing you to prime your consciousness in a really interesting way, is giving you the skills and the scaffolding to be able to be creative. And that's for me as important as learning maths. That's as important as doing English. And this is one of the big challenges of this STEM argument, you know, this reduction of arts education in schools, that actually it's really important, first of all, to get those young people in school. And one of the drivers to get them into school is often arts activities. And then to see the crosstalk between maths and music, super clear correlation, rhythm and mathematics, organisation, spatial organisation, really important in terms of geometry. You know, there's so many ways in which these disciplines crosstalk that actually if we could just use that a bit more and show how important arts activities in schools, it would be really, really worthwhile.
You've been here 10 years.
Yes.
Maybe it feels like a minute.
It does feel like a minute. A decade.
Highs, lows of the year. I mean, of the 10 years, you've obviously had some amazing reviews, had some horrible reviews. Do you mind about the reviews?
I think I always mind about the reviews because I'm one of these artists who reads everything, because I think it's part of the debates. I think it's part of the learning. And I think even in a review where they really dislike something, you learn something about how they're watching, and that's really important. But for me, I don't kind of look at my success in relationship to other people. I look at my kind of success or my questions or my ambitions in terms of myself. So I'm very critical of my own work. At the same time, I want to take risks. I want to be brave. I want to do things that are not done before. I kind of don't want to just kind of repurpose the inherited frameworks of the past. I want to try and invent new ways that speak to audiences of today. So that comes with great risk. And I think what's amazing about organisations like the Opera House is that they're supporting risk, that actually they want to see that happen in this broad continuum of work that exists here. You know, this is one part of a canon of work which touches audiences in different ways.
Do you have a favourite work of your own? I mean, is that impossible?
It's always the next one.
Right.
It's kind of like I'm super critical of the thing I've just made, and then I tend not to like looking too far back at because I think you just sit there looking at all of the decisions that you made then. I mean, choreography is just about making choices, and so you're looking at all these choices that you made then, but with your eyes of today. And it's quite hard. So I think what I really love to do, I love making, I love being in the studio, I love doing the next new thing. I love kind of working with people who are still alive, who are excited about going on a new kind of creative collaborative journey.
It's lucky you like working with people who are still alive.
It
might be difficult with dead people.
No, but
or maybe not.
But if you think, you know, you often people are working with like scores of composers that, you know, have passed, or they're working with all, and there's no problem with that. I mean, that's all this amazing diversity in the dance world, which is really rich and textured and expressive. That's all fantastic. But for me, what drives me is the people contact, is actually being able to have the dialogue, the conversation with the composer in real time in the room, and we working together to create this kind of magic, hopefully on stage.
And if John Travolta was a sort of big influence back then, do you have influences now? Are there people, role models that you think, oh, I love that person, or I'm inspired by them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I do all the time, and I think I'm lucky enough to be able to ask them to work with me. I mean, I think the difference now is that I could probably get to John Travolta and ask him to do something. One of the things that I'm fascinated about Strictly is actually just the endeavour, is the focus, is the kind of the transformation. And actually, if anything on TV gives you an example of how kind of the creative arts transforms lives, it's that. Because actually you realise that in doing something with such creative kind of vivacity, it changes who you are. And that's why we're doing it, right? We're in the business of art changing lives, including our own.
I mean, I'm interested that you say that everyone can dance. I mean, obviously everybody can move, but do you think, aren't there still judgments about what makes a good dance? Where are
the judgments? The judgments are really here. They're all here. And you know, it's almost like it would be the same for me if I had like a little critic sat on my shoulders going, "What you doing? What you doing?" I think there should only be an audience of one when you're dancing, even though there might be 3,500 people watching you, because I think that's where you get to the essence of really who you are. And so you're not learning bits of phrases that somebody else has taught you how to do. That's not you. It's finding what is your physical voice and how can you release that. And I think when you get to that zone when you're dancing where you're really you don't care about who's watching, and you're really inside the music and you're really physically communicating with someone else, it's a phenomenal adrenaline rush. It's a phenomenal, exciting, brilliant feeling inside your body. And I just think many people are too inhibited to do that because of all the social norms and the way in which they've been educated over time. And I think what we need to do is unpick those things and give people that freedom and that space.
Do you think your productions, do you think that they, or what are you trying to say about the world? Are you trying to sort of make sense of our world?
Well, I think I'm trying to say that the world isn't complete. It's not tied up with a bow. That it's partial view. It's fragmented. It's multidimensional. There's just not one story. It's complex. It's complicated. It has amazing humanity at its centre, and emotion can rest in lots of different ways. And emotion doesn't always have to be something which is great, expansive emotion. It might be emotion which actually is much quieter and more subtle. So I think it's to say that ballet and dance isn't one thing. There are no rules, like literally no rules. So
although lots of those old-fashioned traditional ballet people might think there are.
But there are no rules, yeah, so they can carry on thinking. They can keep thinking there are, but why would there be? There are no rules, and we don't want an art form that's dying. We want an art form that's really vibrant and alive and open to new discoveries. And at the same time, we want to understand that, there's too much concreteness in the world, or an attempt to be concrete, that this means this, this kind of like a translation of everything being absolutely in a square book and understood. And I think part of the process of making choreography is about unknowing, it's about unlearning, it's about trying to unpick the things that you think you know about the world. And I think part of the thing about watching is coming to the audience, hoping to be surprised, actually challenging yourself to use different frameworks or scaffolding to watch something. If you always come with your preconceptions in to the theatre and just watch through that filter, you're always going to talk back to yourself in a particular way. We've heard a lot, haven't we, about echo chamber? Yeah, we've heard a lot about this. So actually what you have to do is just slightly orientate yourself in a different way. Just try and make your filter just slightly off centre and see what richness comes back to you and how much more engaged you can become in this wonderful world which is art making.
Are you political? I mean, are there issues that you care about?
I think I am political. I mean, I think making art is political in itself. Education is political. Empowering people to think creatively and challenge the system is political. I think, getting young people to make sure that they can communicate respectfully, but honestly about their thoughts and feelings and ideas, and making sure that they know that no idea is a bad idea. That there are again no rules in how is it that you can have space to communicate about something. And actually, if you think about it, all the major opera houses and theatres in the world are centres of political life in many ways. You get an amazing range of people who are here, who have access to. You have an amazing range of dialogues in that way. They're very important. You see it in Russia with the Bolshoi or something like that. That's a very important theatre in relationship to the kind of the political climate there. So I think art making is always political. And I have things I care about wanting to make sure that creative arts in our world is really encouraged in school. I think it's it's criminal that this restriction of creative possibility and potential with young people is being stemmed really early in education life. I think it's a real mistake, and I'm very, very passionate about that, and we're all working towards making sure that doesn't happen. And I think we just do that by the dialogue, by encouraging people to actually experience what it's like to be creative, because many of the people who are making these decisions are actually fundamentally not creative, and they're fearful of creativity. Not always, but some, and I think it's about that fear about creativity and its potential that I think we want to try and unveil.
And the stuff that you do, because you're dance, I mean, you do a lot of stuff with kids.
Yeah. So we do. So my company, we work with about 8,000 young people a year, so in lots of different ways. But it's about not me teaching them dancing or the company teaching them how to dance. It's about how is it that we give you skills to be creative and making up your own dances. That's what fascinates me. How do you make thousands of young choreographers? And we're not making choreographers as in they're all going to be professional choreographers, that's going to be their life, but people who commit to something, who think of creative ways to solve physical problems and have an outcome and produce something. And these skills are really useful in life full stop, right? They're useful in inventing a product, in design, they're actually useful in politics and actually getting strategy through, the ways in which you can actually work creatively in mind and body affect everything that we do.
Your science, links.
Yeah.
The thing you were talking about to do with swapping hands on the toothbrush. I mean, do you tell me about that and what you think can you rewire your brain?
I think it's just about habits. I think what we do physically and cognitively, we get into habits and we live our life in a very habit-formed way. So if you think about your morning routine, for example, you'll probably always brush your teeth with the same hand in the same way, the same order of events with the toothpaste, with the water. It's kind of a little ritual. And that's fine, but actually what you're doing synaptically is just keeping these ingrained or entrained ways of working. And if you just all of a sudden swap your toothbrush into a different hand, the physical sensation in your body is totally different. All of a sudden, you almost have to relearn it. So if you just expand that for every aspect of your life, I'm walking to work in this particular way. What happens when I go a novel way, a different way? What happens when you just start to push what these normalized versions of yourself in moving are? Interesting things happen to you, interesting. How many times in a day do you kind of push your hands above your head? How many times? How many times do you kind of explore backspace, this feeling of what's behind you, what's going on behind you? We're very frontal as human beings. And I guess what we're saying is if we can work more three-dimensionally in this way, it must teach us something. And this physical intelligence must be as important as mathematical intelligence because we need it for absolutely everything. And so, I think that's a fascination for me, is a curiosity to try and learn more about that, and how do we share that so people can really use the tools of choreography or use the tools of understanding the body in really interesting new ways.
And this is a total jump from that conversation, but I just remembered it. How do you think, you're an only child, and yet your parents fostered lots of children. Tell me about that, and how do you think that influenced you?
Well, I think it's just about sharing, and it's about being with people and being happy to be with people. I mean, maybe it's the reason I chose this art form, because dance is an inherently collaborative art form. I need people in the studio to work with me when I'm making, unless I make everything on myself and just dance myself. It's very much a we, not I endeavour, dance making. And I think I think if you think about sorry, I'll start again. So dance is a really we, not I kind of art form. It's collaborative. It's engaged in everybody working together to create something really wonderful.
But when you were a child, a new child would come into your house. Presumably, that required of you a certain kind of openness and a sort of friendliness and a kind of body language.
But so what are your primers? So my parents have always been so open to people and to receiving people and communicating with people and an ease with people. And that ease just isn't in words, it's actually a physical ease. The power of touch is extraordinary, right? And it literally is extraordinary in breaking down any sort of barrier. And again, in these normalized versions of ourselves in life, we don't actually touch very much, And again, these things are really important. So growing up, I had a lot of physical contact. I was encouraged to do a lot of physical things. And luckily, we were doing, English country dancing at school, at 4 or 5. So what you were doing then, all of a sudden, was working with people and understanding something about their bodies and spatial arrangements and things that we don't do so much now. But these things are really fundamental. They're fundamental when you're working in virtual spaces. You need to have had the experience of this live contact to understand them in virtual spaces. So they're even more important in a technologically literate world than they were ever before. So I think it's really important that we carry on offering those opportunities to be able to do that. And I think because I had that opportunity as a young child is doing that, it's catapulted me to work in the way that I work.
And what was it like as a child having lots of kids coming through your house?
I don't really remember because it's just like friends. It's just like having lots of friends. Lots of my friends would come to our house. It was always about kind of a clarity about what was happening. So the conversation and just an open way of dealing with. It's just human beings, isn't it? It's just about people. It's about understanding them. It's about respecting them. It's about finding your own way to communicate with them.
And they were only coming to stay for a few weeks.
It wasn't. It wasn't that. Yeah.
Interesting. Let me I think it's absolutely fascinating and fabulous, but I just better check that there aren't crucial things that I haven't asked you. And Natasha or anyone else, please throw one in if you want. I know. Influence of raving on your work, that's what I want to know about. Raving, 90s.
Yeah, 90s. So, well, that's interesting. So I came to London, and obviously it was kind of the rave culture, and at that point, it was this kind of primal need to move to a very particular type of music, and that music was very rhythmic, and it kind of sat right inside your body, and it inhabited you, and it made you move. You weren't saying, oh, what shall I do? How shall I think about moving? There's nothing cognitive there. It was just an instinctive primal need to move related to a very particular type of driven beat that lasted a very, very long time. So you had duration, you had form in this way. Also, I have a very long body. And so the ability to be able to kind of fracture the body in a kind of a dysfunctional way, moving the body, folding the body a bit like origami, allowed me to do some quite extraordinary, strange things. But I had some of my most amazing dance experiences raving, but watching other people dance. And, we talked about that, the authentic self, the finding yourself as a dancer. And that one of the wonderful things about rave culture was that actually you often saw the individual and they would do the most amazing things that one had never seen, never seen before or since. And actually that's phenomenal when you can do that. You know, and some people did that obviously from the drugs that they were taking at the same time as raving, and some people just actually did it from the transaction of energy with other people that were there. And that kind of collective sense of dancing is wonderful. Tom York told me a thing once. He was saying that, you know, one of the things that he does often when he's in one of his own gigs, he'll look out at people dancing and he'll hijack something that they're doing, like a physical hijack. He takes it and he'll move like that. And I think that's such a wonderful thing. You see this sea of physicality. You see already something that you really excites you. You take it and you kind of ingest it and you do it yourself. And that trade is something that we try and do a lot when we're making choreography now, that actually when you've got a group of people who are all working creatively and with their own individual voice and life, what I'm doing is scanning all the time, seeing where's their richness. What happens if I put this kind of thing and hijack it and put it with this? What do we get? So it's very experimental like that.
And presumably you mentioned Tommy that video Lotus Flower.
Yeah.
Presumably it's different working with, I mean obviously he's a creative person, but he's not a ballet dancer or a dancer. How different was that process?
It was just the same. He's a phenomenal dancer, right? So and he has an amazing ability to be really real and just to be himself. And he doesn't care about this kind of idea of audience. You know, he's not bothered what people think about him. And that's why you get this amazing kind of just raw physicality. And I guess when you're working with somebody like that, my job is to recognize it, find it, and just help it on its way. It's not to go, well, let's move like this. And we had some fun doing that. You know, I've got some really lovely video of us dancing together during that shoot, because, you know, we shot it really quickly. We did it in a day.
Really?
So and you know, we did a section, then he learnt it, and then he carried on. But he has a natural physical instinct for moving. He's an animal mover, I call that. You know, he's a natural dancer, and so when you're working with someone like that, it's just a total pleasure.
And the Chemical Brothers video, and that's
amazing.
So
that's just a totally different process, because the technological process of that is, you know, very different. And
that pushes some of your buttons, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And it was one shot, you probably noticed.
Yeah,
so the camera shot is 4.5 minutes, and then that really, really long kind of technological process afterwards. But again, it's about interesting people working together, hopefully to challenge the conventions of things that have gone in the past.
Do you still go raving?
Do I still go raving? I don't actually.
Too old. Too old, too tired.
Yeah,
too busy dancing in other ways.
No, exactly.
And we're going to film you, thank you very much, in the rehearsal later.
Yeah.
So it'd be great. I mean, lots of what you said, I'm sure, will make sense with what we see in the rehearsal anyway, but I don't know who you're rehearsing. But whether
I'm rehearsing. it's actually quite a quiet rehearsal. I'm working on something from the third act of Wolf Works, which is a very kind of it's based around Virginia Woolf's suicide. So it's quite it's quite quiet, very, very, very fluid, and it's with two amazing dancers who you'll be able to see something of this kind of like physical origami that we're working on.
Great. And I heard the BAFTAs nominations this morning and heard about La La Land. I was just thinking about that amazing opening scene in La La Land.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing that you would love to do?
Oh, I love working in films. You know, I've worked in lots of really interesting films, and, you know, I did one of the Harry Potter films. I just did Tarzan and Fantastic Beasts. You know, working in film is a phenomenal kind of gift. I like, though, when often you're using choreography in a different kind of way in film. One of the great things about making films is you don't know why a choreographer would be involved in certain films, but it might be because of motion capture. So that's the system that takes the maths out of your body. It can take your physical signature and put it into any.
So is that what happened in Fantastic Beasts?
Well, yeah. So if you're working on something like the Obscurus in Fantastic Beasts, how can you make some physical activity that then is motion capture, then becomes animation?
So you were involved in that.
Yeah. So you know, how do you do? I also, you know, I worked with Ezra Miller, all his physicality on Credence. So actually, how does he inhabit his kind of physical role for that? So choreography happens in lots of different ways. So the La La Land experience is something which is phenomenal. That's big kind of like Hollywood, you know, musical numbers, and that's one way in which a choreographer can work. But it's also about characterization and finding small physical detail. And so there's a huge amount of choreographers, really brilliant choreographers who are working in film, or movement directors in film who are doing this all the time. So again, it's something you don't think choreography exists in, but it exists in all the time.
Are you directing your own film?
I will be directing my own film.
What is it?
Yeah. I can't really say too much about it, but it's in the summer, and it's a tribute to Back to the Future. It's called Great Scott. So yeah, it'll be my first feature film, which I'm super excited about.
That's exciting. And do you think, I mean, that's a bit of a, possibly, I don't know about it, but if it's Back to the Future, possibly a bit of a nostalgia fest. La La Land,
Manchester.
bit of a nostalgia fest. I mean, do you think in these sort of possibly dark times, we're all looking for a bit of nostalgia and a bit of...
I think what we want is a bit of imagination. What we like is imagination, and we want bravery, and we want kind of a sense of, not this kind of populism which is very negative and kind of, really inward looking. And I think one of the great things about La La Land is it's just fresh. Yeah, you feel alive when you watch it. It makes you smile. It gives you a real sense of why you're here in the world and what good you'd want to do. And I think that's really a fantastic thing to have in the world.
And if you had one tip for our audience who are all sitting on their sofas watching Newsnight, watching you constricted on the sofa, one tip for them to change their lives in some way, move a bit more, would you have a tip for people?
I think I would just say remain curious. And I think, it's easy to say that, but it's harder to enact. I think, to remain curious and open to the world, you really have to actively change something about yourself, and whether that's watching kinds of films that you never normally watch, whether that's going to a gig that you wouldn't normally go to, whether that's watching dance in a way that you wouldn't, whether that's picking up poetry, it doesn't really matter what it is, but just challenge yourself just to be open and curious. And if it's not for you, that's fine. Find another thing. Don't let that put you off for life. Just find another thing. And I think that keeps you really engaged and alive, and all of your senses completely attuned. And I think that's what we always want in life, right? To be highly attuned.
I can't keep you sitting down anymore, so I'm going to end the interview because I feel terrible about it. Thank you so much.